Christopher Rosen, Gold Derby. I'm so pleased to be joined by David Magee, a two-time Oscar nominee and the writer of A Man Called Otto. David, obviously this film is based on an acclaimed best-selling book. It was previously made into a film. So when you sat down to work on your adaptation of this story, I guess, where did you start and how did you want to approach it?
Well, from the moment I saw the Swedish version of the film before I read the book, but I almost immediately recognized my own father in aspects of the lead character. My dad wasn't quite as grumpy as Otto, but he has that kind of stoic, of a certain generation, Midwestern feel to him, where you never talk about what you're going through or how you're feeling. You always just kind of nod and move on through life. And it reminded me very much of him. And I was so moved by both the book and the film that really the only question I had was, how do we find that American version of that? I knew the Midwest was the right answer, but we had to find parallels to other things. There's a story about socialized medicine, for example, in the Swedish film and the book, and we don't really have that here, so we had to find different plot devices to bring certain aspects of the story to life.
So, and then from a character standpoint, how did you go? I mean, like you said, it does feel Midwesterny, but I mean, what was important about Americanizing Otto, I guess?
I think Otto's a character that all of us recognize in some ways. I think Otto is that uncle or cousin, or in my case, father, who has moments of grumpiness and impatience with the world around him. The world is full of idiots who, if they only behaved the way they should behave, the world would be a better place. We find those people sometimes exasperating, sometimes charming, and quite often very lovable. And so I just knew I wanted to live with that character for a while. So that part wasn't very hard to translate over into an American story.
Do you have you obviously have Tom Hanks here in the role, which I think does also a lot of, the audience has an obviously affinity for him as an actor, and a lot of enjoys Tom Hanks. I don't know if you know this, he's a very beloved figure. So I mean, obviously I guess I was thinking, does that help you even push his curmudgeoniness further, because you're going to have an actor like Tom Hanks able to maybe humanize it in a way that a different performer maybe wouldn't, I guess?
I think absolutely. I mean, Tom Hanks is Tom Hanks. It's very hard for you not to love Tom Hanks, even when he is at his most curmudgeonly. But that said, I don't usually write films knowing from the first day who is going to be playing the role. Usually, I'm writing with a character image in mind more than I'm actually writing for an actor. But so much of this film, because we all have Tom Hanks story, we can hear Tom Hanks in our head. We've seen so many movies that as soon as I started writing, I would hear his voice, saying it. And I knew what I could get away with very easily. And I knew he'd call me on it if I didn't.
So this is obviously, you worked with Marc, the director here, on Finding Neverland, Oscar nomination for you, which is very exciting, and obviously reuniting here. That's a long time away, and obviously I know you've done a lot of films since then. So I guess, what was it like, kind of reuniting with Marc and collaborating him on this, and how has your working relationship changed, I guess?
It's been wonderful working with Marc, because almost 20 years has passed since we worked together the first time. And when we first collaborated on Finding Neverland, that was my very first film, and it was his, I think, second or third, and we were newbies. I mean, we were still finding our way in this industry. I was just grateful they were allowing me to show up, and they hadn't replaced me after I wrote the first draft of the film. So it's very different coming back 20 years later, having much more experience, and having a shorthand with someone that feels almost automatic. He's the nicest man, the gentlest man to work with. It's always low pressure, very welcoming environment to work with him, and we just understand each other. So much so that we're starting to collaborate on another film coming up. So
Yeah, I know. I saw that as well. That's very exciting, I think, because I think you guys do seemingly have a really a good rapport. You worked on so many adaptations in your career, obviously. Like Finding Neverland was an adaptation. I mean, like you've done A Life of Pi was your other not Oscar nominated acclaimed book. When you're sitting down to like broadly, I guess, what is your approach to doing adaptations? I think you do have a very strong knack for that, obviously, and you do a great job of like, making the story your own, but also respecting the source. I guess, how do you kind of think about it when you're sitting down to put pen to paper, basically, or fingers to keyboard, as it were?
well, I always believe that there's one through line that attracts you most as the screenwriter to any novel, and even if you want to do the whole book, realistically, a novel is 180,000 words, 200,000 words, and a screenplay is closer to 25,000 words. You're not going to be able to bring it all in. It's easy to see that you're not going to have to bring in all the set descriptions that you can just kind of allude to, a glamorous restaurant or whatever. But then you have to home in on what it is that is most important to you as a screenwriter. As I said, in the case of this, I felt like I knew this character and I knew I could bring that character to the screen. And then what was most important to me is that kind of celebration of, even when you think at times, what's the point of everything, you can always find more joy and happiness in the people that you meet along the way. And so that became really a focus for me.
Yeah, and I think it really comes through in this, like you were mentioning, like he's a curmudgeon, but obviously has. It's an interesting character because I was like, oh, I've not, you've seen movies where there are curmudgeonly characters before, certainly, like you said, and it's a common thing in real life, like people are into them. But sometimes I feel like they're portrayed as, having not nefarious, but just like like he has such a respect, I feel like, for everybody, and wants a very strict level of fairness, which I found really compelling. And I guess, can you talk about how you tried to flesh that out throughout, and especially with like his relationships? I found like really interesting too. Like he could have, it's like easy to imagine a version of this where he is like the jerk guy, but he's really very kind. He just has a very strict moral code, I guess, of how things should be. Like you said, everybody's an idiot because they're not up to his level. But I guess, can you talk about that and how you kind of like finesse that a little?
So Otto in the film and in the original book says that he sees the world in black and white. And that the woman that he married and who was the love of his life saw the world in color. She was the color for him. He is a moral man. He is a pragmatic man. He is very concerned with the most efficient way to do things, the right way to do things. And without his wife in his life anymore, he finds himself losing patience with everyone else around him who can't just keep it simple, do the intelligent thing, who doesn't know how to handle things. He's quick to lose patience with people, but he's a decent man. Even if sometimes the things he says about other people are callous, they're not meant in a callous way. He's just being frank. And I think he's sometimes surprised that people think of him as difficult, because that's not how he sees himself. So once you realize that about the character, he's a lot of fun to write.
Yeah, and it's a lot. I mean, like even like I don't think, I would not say this is a spoiler, but like late in the film, there's a scene where, and it's in the trailer, where he gets into an altercation with a hospital clown, and the way that scene resolves, I think, was like really touching, because you understand like why he's so upset about like that sequence. And I think, again, I was like struck by that scene, because I was like, oh, in another movie, this would have just been like, mad guy like slaps the clown around. Like I've seen that before, and like that idea, and to have that little twist on it about like his own humanity, and like it just is it's a very compelling character, like you said, very rich, I would imagine, to write. Was it a thing with you two where it's like, this is a very contained, I would say, story, right? It takes place, it kind of jumps forward a little bit and back, but mostly over a little stretch of time. Was it tough for you to like kind of, I guess, tie it off or stuff? Because I feel like he's such a rich character. You could put him in a lot of different spots and maybe even expand beyond like what was in the novel and even in the film as well.
There were plenty more things that we could have done with that character. I mean, he lives a rich life. It's an interesting story. Frederick Bachman, who wrote the novel, who is the sweetest man you would ever want to meet, originally created the character, and I hope I'm getting this exactly right. It was either for a blog post, I think it was for a blog post, or it was for a magazine, online magazine, where he was creating little vignettes about a man called Otto, because he felt like everybody knows this guy who's the one who holds up the line at the cashier, the one who argues about, this is a two for the price of one flower sale, so I should get one flower for half price, And so he would write these little blurbs called "A Man Called Otto Goes to the Floral Shop," "A Man Called Otto has an accident," whatever. And each one was just an entertaining vignette. And then as he did it more and more, he got more and more interested in this character, and he found the depth within it and then created the novel out of that. So there are plenty of adventures of people like Otto that can be found out there.
Yeah, and again, like I said, I think it's a credit to your script that it does feel very cohesive and not episodic. You know what I mean? Like it does. You're telling a story with him while doing those, like you said, like little bits where it's like him at the store and complaining about the rope length, which again felt like very it's very amusing, and Tom Hanks really kills it. I think he does such a great job with the character too. I mean, like the original novel and the book obviously came out long before we were during a pandemic, and I feel like obviously you're writing the movie shot during the pandemic. Not that it's a pandemic movie, but I think I guess for you, did like the meaning of the movie or the message of the movie take on a new context for you in the current world that we live in, obviously, where we're here on Zoom and not face to face and all these different things that we're still dealing with?
Absolutely, it did, and you're absolutely right. You can't plan a movie that takes years to make to land at the right contemporary moment to reflect on something. It's not like doing episodic television where sometimes they're able to rush, ripped from the headlines, something straight into production. But that said, a lot of this story is about a man who is both impatient with others and divisive and misunderstood. And this is a story about people from different backgrounds and different cultures coming together and trying to understand one another and help each other through very difficult times in their lives. And it's funny, and the differences between them are not nearly as great as anyone might imagine. And I think there's something nice about the timing, something fortuitous about having a film come out about a divisive character and realizing something that makes him very human underneath it all, and that's what brings the story together. So
yeah, and it feels like the community aspect of the film is great too. Can you talk a little about, like you mentioned, like where the setting and like why you picked Pittsburgh? I think is where obviously I think it's shot, right? Or like, so like why that setting? And I found the community, it's the community itself, I found really interesting, the way, like obviously like the development. I guess, can you talk about, I'm sure that's in the book, I would imagine, and like, but like, can you talk about finding that kind of like swap for an Americanized version of it, because I just found that really cool.
Absolutely, finding that specific community with the kind of row townhouses and then the garages at the end mirrors almost perfectly the way it's described in the book. And when I first saw the Swedish movie and read the book, I thought, well, there's nothing like that in America. I mean, there are condos, but that was as close as I could come. And I was in my head as I was writing. And I deliberately, as I was writing the first draft, I just kind of said Midwest. I didn't pick a specific town. There was some debate about whether he was in the Swedish book. He's involved in railroads and in engineering for the rails, and his father worked for the railway. And so for a while we were thinking, well, is there really an equivalent? And we looked into that, but when we landed on kind of the steel industry, which is a slightly dying industry, and it's gone on hard times, and Otto is a man who has kind of watched his thriving community be overrun by larger developments, and at the same time there's been kind of economic strife within the community. That seemed like a natural fit with Pittsburgh. And then when they came back with photos of this development, we were just astounded that you actually had this real street with these, with the garages and it was almost the perfect location, right down to the way that it was a dead end street that then turned at the corners. So we couldn't believe our luck. And at that point we went, yeah, that's where it is.
That's really cool. Yeah. We have to wrap up here momentarily, but I mentioned earlier, obviously, you're a two-time Oscar nominee for Finding Neverland and Life of Pi. I guess I want to ask you, like, what do you, more of the Life of Pi one? Because obviously the first, you mentioned, like, that was your first movie was Finding Neverland. When you got to go back as a nominee for Life of Pi, I guess, what were you hoping to take from that experience that you maybe learned on Finding Neverland, I guess,
What was I?
as a nominee?
As a nominee, oh, I mean, going
Yeah.
back through that whole process?
Yes.
I was just grateful to be there both times. The first time I couldn't, I mean, the first time was surreal. The first time was, I just wrote one movie and I get to go. And that was a whirlwind that still, if I think back on those days, I'm a little dizzy thinking about how, I mean, I can't tell you what a stunned rush that was when all of that suddenly happened. I was in a much better place to appreciate the ride by the time I got to Life of Pi. It was a pleasure to, and again, I wasn't expecting any, I knew that there were some great films that year. I wasn't really expecting anything in terms of like, would I win or not? I was grateful to be on the ride. And I had a much better time getting to know the other nominees, feeling more like a part of the community. The first time I felt like I had been invited to, I was a high school student who had been invited to a frat party and I didn't know anybody, and I was kind of batting out of my league. But the second time was a lot more fun. It was an easier ride.
That's awesome. We have to wrap up there. David Magee, two-time Oscar nominee, like we said, screenwriter of Man Called Otto, great film coming out in December and then wider release in January. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.